All right, last week we had an introductory class. So today we talk about sovereignty. Today we talk about sovereignty. Sovereignty is an important concept within the international political system. That is called sovereignty. Is an important concept within the international political system. But without sovereignty, states cannot exist. States will not have identity. Sovereignty is what gives them the power to exist within the international political system. I said without sovereignty, states can't exist. Sovereignty is what makes you to be equal to other states within the international political system. That is one. Sovereignty is what gives you the right to dominate in your own environment. Without sovereignty, you cannot exist as a state. For you to be called a state now, sovereignty is a sine qua non. Sovereignty is important. If your sovereignty is taken, you stop being a state. You are in this class because you are human. A dog, a cat, a rat, a sheep, a goat, they can't attend this class. And because when you see that, you say, no, you are not part. I mean, check the people now. They are not human. You can only come by lecture, you are human. It does not matter whether you are rich or you are poor, or you are short, or you are tall, or you are fat, or you are slim. It is the same with sovereignty. Without sovereignty, you cannot call yourself a state. Sovereignty is an important attribute of a state. Remember, I use the word that it does not matter whether you are rich or poor, or whether you are tall or you are short. Technically, we all agree that they are students. Because they have sovereignty. That sovereignty that you have is of humanity. Can I continue? Yes. It's the same for a state. It is the same for a state. You can only call yourself a state. You can only dominate your environment. You can only exist if you have that thing called sovereignty. Exactly. And that is why other states will be able to relate with you as peers. They call Nigeria a third world country. In case you are not aware, there are 40 world countries, there are 50 world, and there are 60 world countries. Now, if you are saying here in Nigeria, what you are saying is poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, what they are saying in North Korea is poverty pro max. So that means there is degree to poverty. If you are saying we are suffering within Nigeria, what they are saying in Benin is far worse than that of Nigeria. What they are saying in Haiti is far worse than that of what we are saying in Nigeria. But this is the interesting thing. They are all states because they have sovereignty, despite their poverty. That you have 10 caliber does not make you not be a student. You are still a student of last. Because you have the human identity. It is the same with that thing called sovereignty. Please, can I continue? Yes. So quickly. So how do we define this sovereignty? How do we define this sovereignty? Now, there are two definitions we're actually looking at. And when I say two definitions, we're trying to look at two natures of sovereignty. There's what they call internal sovereignty and external sovereignty. Internal sovereignty and external sovereignty. Internal is sometimes called domestic sovereignty and external sovereignty. Now, according to Jim Borden, he said sovereignty. Sovereignty is the absolute and perpetual power which a state has over its citizens and territory unrestrained by any law. Absolute and perpetual power which a state has over its citizens and its territory unrestrained by any law. No, I'll take it slow. Absolute power, absolute perpetual power, which a state has over its citizens and its territory, unrestrained by any law. Of course, we disagree with that definition. I will explain why. That is old school definition. That man actually gave that definition in 1576. Now, I said, Jim Borden came up with that definition. Said absolute and perpetual power which a state has over its citizens and is then unrestrained by any law. And I said that definition is old school. and deadly. Now let me give you some instances of what is meant by unrestrained by any law. In Yoruba history, you know the kings now, they call them back into Bisha. After God, you have the kings. Now, the kings are unbelievably powerful. Now, the kings are unbelievably powerful. A king might look at you and tell you to commit suicide, and you have to kill yourself. No, they have that kind of power. So a king might tell you and say, go and die, and you have to go and die. That one is even better. A king can see your wife and confiscate her. Now, Yoruba call it destiny. Yes, yesterday is even better. You know, when you confiscate, probably you marry. No, the king can just be strolling with his Ilarish now. Those guys are following him. And your wife is in the market, minding her business. And you on your farm, minding your own business. And the king sees your wife. He's the owner of your life and that of your wife and your born children. So the man just tells his Ilarish now to use the arapa to form a square and sleep with that woman right there. Not going to marry her, just sleep with her. You are the husband, you should be happy. A god, a king slept with your wife. Okay, as the agreement man, you have the right to complain to God. But there's one little problem. To report the king to God, not to go through the king, to report himself to God. Yeah, that's sovereignty. And that's why they call Yoruba kings black with Furisha. They are believed to be gods. You know, not the concept of king, you now see them on social media and rest of something. In those days, you don't even look a king in the eye, you are dead. You cannot even hear the voice of a king. It's a crime. And that's why when you see the Ogi of Ife back then, there's one beat that's always covering their eyes. They are spirits. You are not meant to see spirits. Not this one is just full of nice type of the king and just like, Alpha, my man, wake up. So as I said, absolute power and authority, which the state has over it, and all restraint. So the man, the woman, their children, they are all the things. That is absolute. That of Nigeria is even better. In France, in Europe, there's what they call the signoral right that the chiefs, if I can call them chiefs or kings, they enjoy. If you want to get married over there, then, not now, based on the concept of sovereignty, the eve of your wedding, the king has the right to stay with your wife and return her to you the following day. I said absolute. I said absolute. So you cannot understand what is meant by sovereignty. It is the sovereignty that Russia, that is why Russia invaded Ukraine, that it has the right and the power to do it. Your parent gave you your, I don't know, lunch money, or breakfast money, and extra money for transport pay and rent. I can say, since I'm the sovereign, after you heard I was sovereign in this class, contribute all the money and give to this gentleman. If you don't pay, you will have carry back. In fact, you won't grab it. Exactly. So you have that's it. That's absolute power and perpetual power which a state has over its citizens, and it's all there are no checks and balances. So you can imagine the excesses back there of the king. Can I continue? Yes. And that was why I said we disagree with that definition. So you cannot appreciate what is meant by that thing called sovereignty. But a better definition of sovereignty, is the one provided by Fawcett. Louis Fawcett, F-A-W-C-E-T-T. He said, sovereignty, F-A-W-C-E-T-T, Fawcett. Now it said, sovereignty is now the authority. Authority is legal compared to the thing that you call power. Authority, which a state has over its citizens and its territories, but now being restrained by the law. In other words, there are now checks and balances. Authority, which a state has over its citizens and its territory, but they're being restrained with the law. And the other one is unrestrained by any law, unchecked. Authority is better. Authority is legal. Authority is derived. I'm lecturing in this class not because I have power, but because I have the authority. Last year has mandated me to lecture. So technically, before your eyes, I have sovereignty. Your class cannot just come around and say, everybody put your phone on vibration, I want to talk to you. You cannot say that I don't like your case, don't come for this lecture. Because so that man is not a lecturer, he does not have the authority to talk to you in such a fashion. Fawcett said, it is authority derived, legal, given. Tinubu is our president because he has authority, not power, not force. Derived, used by a state to govern its territory and its people. But then now there are checks and balances by the law. And then you cannot sue the king or the monarch. But now, as we are looking at it, you can sue president. That is the check. So there are restraints to sovereignty. Presently, Israelis and the Palestinians are fighting. I'm sure you must have heard of that little thing. But then, South Africa took Israel. That's the check now. To the ICJ, International Criminal Court, to sue Israel for killing the Palestinians. I said there are now checks and balances. Israel is a sovereign state, remember. It has the authority. South Africa is also a sovereign state. Despite the fact that Israel is far higher than South Africa. But it also has the authority. So Israel and South Africa is now suing Israel. That is sovereignty. If there are no checks and balances, Israelis will just kill the Palestinians and nothing will happen. Can I continue? Yes. Yesterday, 3 countries in West Africa said they are no longer interested in ECOWAS. 3 poor countries in West Africa. Niger, Burkina Faso, and their third poverty partner, Mali. Now they said they are moving out of ECOWAS. Nigeria is far higher than them. But then we cannot fight them because they have the right. According to they have the right. We are not interested in that association. Again, that is sovereignty, authority, checks and balances. If there are no checks and balances, Nigeria would have just gone there to bomb them and force them to come back. But they said they are no longer interested. There is a same in Nigeria. Remember our elections now? It took months before they confirmed Tinubu. After the election, an individual, a Nigerian citizen, took the president to court. So that means it is no longer absolute and perpetual power. That means sovereignty is now being restrained by exactly. It's now being restrained by the law. So all countries in the world are sovereign states. But then they cannot just behave whichever way they feel like behaving. Russia invaded Ukraine and they dragged Russia to the UNO. They are trying to drag it to the ICJ. Countries in the world are condemning Russia. You have sovereignty, but that does not mean you use your sovereignty to destroy other states. That means there are checks and balances. That's exactly what sovereignty is now. There are checks and balances. Sorry, what is the most powerful instrument in Nigeria presently? The president, the courts, or the constitution? No, that's a smart answer. Nigerian constitution. They sue the president based on that constitution. Exactly. That means Nigeria is sovereign. It's not a country of anything books. You know, where it's like you commit the crime, you do the time. Buhari now, that man called Atiku sued him throughout. Can I continue? Yes. Quickly, how can a state acquire or lose sovereignty? How can a state acquire or lose sovereignty? There are 4 ways to acquire sovereignty. There are 4 ways to acquire sovereignty. 1, the cheapest, the easiest, the sweetest. Granting of independence. Through the granting of independence. Through the granting of independence. 2, yeah, to grant, I give thee, I make thee. Through the granting of independence. 2, one of the most difficult. True war of liberation. True war of liberation. 2, true war of liberation. 3, true war of secession. Then finally, true voluntary declaration. True voluntary declaration. True voluntary declaration. How can a state lose its sovereignty? 2 ways, not 3, just 2. 1, true war of aggression. A state can lose its sovereignty. True war of aggression, that is 1. 2, true voluntary renunciation. True voluntary renunciation. War of aggression, 1. The voluntary renunciation. Now, let me quickly take those 2. Since there's something that is still presently going on with the international political system. The first one is through war aggression. That is, another country can come around to eat your sovereignty. When they succeed in eating that sovereignty, but then you are no longer eating. You cease to exist. Presently, ladies and gentlemen, that is what Russia is trying to do to Ukraine. So whenever there's war aggression, if that country, the more powerful country succeeds in devouring to eat, the less powerful state, then it ceases to exist. So automatically it loses its sovereignty. So that means you can have sovereignty and you can still lose sovereignty at the same time. So one of the ways you can lose that sovereignty is through war of aggression. If the Palestinians were to be states now, for example, we would have said that is what Israel is trying to do today. To eat their sovereignty. One woman, they call her in Russian history, Catherine the Great. They call this woman in Russian history, Catherine the Great. Or they call her Katarina. I don't know how they call her today. Something. Yeah, the Great. You know why she was called the Great? She succeeded in eating the sovereignty of Poland 3 times. She removed that country from the world map 3 solid times. A woman. What the man can do, what the man cannot do, the woman can do better. Not once, not 3. You know, the first time, this was where it gets interesting. The first time, that was the when she took Poland, when she raised their sovereignty, she handed Poland over, a country, to her boyfriend. Managed. Sovereignty is a powerful concept. I mean, imagine there are queens and we have that power as it is. I want to destroy that country 3 times in anger, in annoyance. There was one wonderful guy you come across because of this lecture. I pray you don't ever have a grandfather like that. They call him Joseph Stalin. May his soul rest in peace. Now, he was the Russian leader. One of the most powerful Russian leaders back then. But then if you have seen this guy, I mean, he's so Father Christmas, you know, very gentle, very easygoing. I really want to use the word very prayerful. But that gentleman called Joseph Stalin, which will be coming across eventually in your lecture, single-handedly, that's one human, single-handedly killed 24 million Russians. You know, it's the number. I don't appreciate what is called 24 million. I'm not saying foreigners. He killed 24 million of his own people. And on his deathbed in 1953, I remember when they asked him that question, I was not there. Just the way I say I remember, I was not there. You know, when they asked him that question, what is his only regret? After you killed 24 million people already, your own people. Yes, well, what is your only regret? I thought probably the man would have said, oh God, forgive me, it was a mistake, the devil sent me and all this. You know what this man said? He said his only regret was that he did not kill more. So there are a lot of wonderful character in history that you come across. Don't worry, I should progress in this lecture. Now, by the time you are through with the lecture, it will not change your concept of what is right and what is wrong. And this man that I've just mentioned is still being celebrated today in Russia as one of their greatest founding fathers. Can I continue? Yes. In 1940, this gentleman called Joseph Stalin cleared Ukraine completely. He removed them. Because he wouldn't want them to be used by the enemies of Russia to destroy Russia. That of Ukraine is better. That of Ukraine is still better. Chechnya, a particular tribe of 1 million people. This man lifted every single one of them. They gave it the dead and the bones in the grave, shifted them from their territory and erased them. So a state can lose its sovereignty through war of aggression, but be comforted. We are safe in Nigeria. I can't imagine when they're waking up and saying they want to take over Nigeria. Like that. And I don't think Mali would make that mistake or Chad. Or I doubt you actually do that there. See. So don't worry, you are safe. Nobody is interested in getting your sovereignty. True voluntary renunciation. You know, that thing might sound shocking. Voluntary. Now, let me give you a good example by using the human life. Now, there's what they call euthanasia. Euthanasia is basically. I think it's euthanasia. That's it. You can just wake up one day and say, well, I'm no longer interested in living. Daddy, mommy, I thank you for everything, I appreciate you, and so on and so forth. Today I want to go and kill myself. It sounds strange. No, you know, the world is a crazy place, actually. The world is a crazy place. There's a particular country in Europe where people pay money to go and die. It's so beautiful, so nice that you can specify the kind of death that you want and the time you want to die. Yes, people pay money to be killed. And you don't have domesticated. You are just tired of this world, you know, you have nothing else to do. Everyone is calling, I don't want to wait, let me just go fast. So you go there, it's like a hospital too, they treat you fine, they have everything, give you your bill, then you tell them the time you want to, then they'll ask you, like, how do you want? Exactly. So if humans have the right to renounce their life, state also has that right to renounce. I am no longer interested in becoming a state. Exactly, that is the point I'm trying to make. Ladies and gentlemen, it happened one in history, 1958, when Syria and Egypt said they are no longer interested in becoming states. So they dropped their identity and became united. They call themselves the United Arab Republic. United Arab Republic. Syria said, Egypt said they are no longer interested in becoming states now. They are tired of this state that they stressful. So they dropped their identity, they renounced their sovereignty, became one, and called themselves United Arab Republic. Unfortunately, that marriage did not last. By 1961, they realized that they made a mistake and they went their separate ways. So that is why you still have Egypt and Syria today as independent states. My point is, it does happen that humans do take their own life, not the way they are taking of suicide. No. How can a state now acquire sovereignty? Through the granting of independence, first one. Through the granting of independence, that means when a state that has been colonized that was being governed by another powerful country is now allowed to have its freedom. So they have their sovereignty. A perfect example is that country called Nigeria. I'm sure you know Nigeria. Yes. Nigeria was colonized by the British. Now, when the British got tired, they just told Nigerians, go, take camp, enjoy yourself. So when a country that was being colonized, suddenly, you guys they do it now, shoemaker, tailor, bricklayer. You know, they work for 7 years, 6 years, 5 years, then later their gas give them their freedom. It is when they get that freedom that they can open their own shop. It's the same with state. When you are being colonized, you've been colonized for some years and you got tired of that thing on the busy fighting. They don't know to fight, go. And that's why we celebrate 1960 October. That was when the British gave us our independence. So that was when Nigeria became a sovereign state. And that is why they say we don't really appreciate that stuff in Nigeria. Now, like some other countries, we were given our independence on a plate of gold. In fact, it will shock you. By 1957, Britain was already telling Nigeria to have it. And Nigeria said, no, we are not ready. We are ready, we are ready. I enjoy this servitude. So they dumped that thing on Nigeria. That's why they keep using the word on the platter of gold. The independence of Nigeria on the platter of gold. If you are given $1 billion now, you won't know what to do with $1 billion. Club party spend. Because they dash, or just dash. But the money you sweat, you worked for, you are given that sovereignty. And if no stress, take, enjoy, become a state. And a classic example, like I said, is Nigeria. The other one is that one they call Ghana. Now let me quickly go to the second one. That other one that I accepted, True War of Liberation. And I think that's where I'll end the lecture. True War of Liberation. War of Liberation is when they colonize people, they killed, they fought their colonizer before they were given their identity. They killed, they shed blood, they forced the colonizers to grant them their independence. A good example is that country called Zimbabwe. The Zimbabweans killed the British. Until the British were forced to give them their independence by 19, they killed them anyhow. So the same with Algeria. Algeria killed the French. Before the French allowed them to go, that beautiful thing, let by people go or something will happen. Something happened. They fought the French to a standstill, and they were forced to relinquish, go. It was the same with Angola, Mozambique, Guinea. They killed the Portuguese because they didn't want them to have their independence. It was the same with Vietnam and they killed the French. I cannot understand this French people always going around trying to cause me. I have not seen it. And I say this about the French, there is no country in the world that France colonized that's actually successful. All of them are failures. There is not one country. There is no one country. Don't go far. Start with the ones around Nigeria. Benin. No. You want to Japan. The next thing I tell you, you are Japan into Benin. So, exactly. Benin, Chad, Niger, Mali, failure. All of them, one after the other. Okay, maybe it's because it's the African cause. Africans, you have lots of Jews and the rest of the country. Now, they now left Africa, they went to Asia, failure. Vietnam, it was the same failure. Now, the point is, you are colonizing us, we are not benefiting, we are suffering. Allow us to. You said, hey, they started killing them. When they got tired, they allowed them to go. And that's true war of liberation. Compared to that of Nigeria, that is based on granting of independence. 3. What are you saying? War of secession. War of secession is when a part of a state, listen to secession, when a part of a state breaks out of that state to have its own independent state. That is what you call secession. You have to be when people like this, they leave this class and pick her as their class rep. That is secession. Not the new level student. They are part of this class, breaking out of this class to have their own 100 level. So when a part of a state breaks out of that state to have its own state and its own state, that is what you call secession. And they have sovereignty. Now in 1967, the Igbos tried it in Nigeria. That's what they call Biafra. So 67, I won't use Nigeria as an example because that was not secession. But I'll go to Ethiopia. There was a war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Eritrea used to be part of Ethiopia. Eritrea succeeded in breaking out of Ethiopia. So now, presently, Eritrea is. Another good example is Sudan. Sudan and South Sudan, 2011. So South Sudan is now an independent state. Another good example is Indonesia and East Timor. East Timor broke out of Indonesia, so it's now an independent state. A final example is that country called Pakistan. Pakistan broke out of India to become an independent state. Then out of Pakistan, Bangladesh broke out of it to become an independent state. During every election in Nigeria, you kept hearing that thing. You want to secede, Arewa Republic, Oduduwa Republic. If you had succeeded, you would have had the same thing within Nigeria. Towards the end of Buhari's reign, I remember who are angry, everybody wants to go their different ways. And that's secession. Remember that gentle Yoruba man called you Boho? That was why Buhari declared him wanted. They branded him as secessionist. Remember that gentleman called the Kanu? I fought now and the rest of them. And it's the same now. If they have succeeded in establishing their own independent, they had now said that they had independence. But like I said, I wouldn't want to use them because it's not something that is successful. But I'll give you an example of successful one. So you have a nice day.